So my involvement and association has generally been working on issues of informality in cities, initially in Mumbai and subsequently around the world through the Slum Dwellers International. And for the longest time, as people who worked with people living informally, somehow we were always in a battle with environmentalists who felt that poor people living near the water bodies or near forests, urban forests, or in low-lying areas or near marshes were disrupting and destroying, nature, without acknowledging that poor people were living in these spaces because the city never gave them any other space. That Mary Robinson was asked by the Secretary General to develop the architecture for the social justice element of the climate change process, which was going to be presented at the Paris COP. And I was invited to be on that very illustrious committee, which had very eminent people. But I went there as a representative of people who lived informally. And that was my first real exposure to the challenges of climate change. And it made me realize that the issues of urban poverty, the challenges of the volume of urban informality in the cities was just not part of the whole framing or the whole understanding or the inclusion in the people who were vulnerable in this process. And that was the beginning of my struggle to try and develop a way by which we don't fall into two silos working on development and climate, but to look at ways by which we get more and more smart to bring climate science and technology as foundational elements of the development work we do. And that's one of my biggest pleas whenever I'm talking either within our urban informal networks or generally, that where serious vulnerability, urban or poor, urban serious vulnerabilities about urban poverty or rural poverty or indigenous communities, you can't separate development investment from climate investments. They are not different. They have to be two parts of the same investment in order to produce a future which is resilient and robust. But I find this is really missing in our discussions today. I've been doing this now for right from about 50 years now. And I am always focused on the issues of urban poverty as seen through the lens of very poor women who live informally. What is very clear to me is that whether it's development, whether it is city growth, whether it is disasters, whether it's just poverty alleviation, you take any subject, there is a complete invisibility of the reality that presently, globally, 40% of everybody living in the city lives informally in the global south. And this is projected to double in the next 10 years as we keep increasing the disasters that happen because our inability to change our lives and lifestyles. And it's going to only exacerbate the crisis of urbanization, poverty, and the stress that poor people bear the burden of. So this is what I feel has such a low threshold of insights, knowledge, research, investments, technology inputs, that it's quite frightening to look at what a low base we start off with. Planning is exclusionary, investment is exclusionary. There are no techniques, there are no research systems that actually work to produce a database. I mean, if you look at even the IPCC reports, we all talk about extreme poverty in cities, but we neither have the kind of technical data that the IPCC report requires to put into this, nor do we have the bandwidth to do something like that. Because conventional work on urban areas starts with, let's pursue getting people legal entitlements. And the fact is that we are all locked in a sort of colonial planning system where very few people own large amounts of land, be they government or private. And our planning systems neither project the real numbers that need to find a place to stay, nor do they accommodate the reality that people have already breached all those things. So it's like a very dangerously sort of visible, invisible challenge. So when you come into a city, you see lots of poor people living in terrible conditions, but that doesn't get depicted in the design, planning, and action. So just to give a very brief backdrop, I started working 50 years ago on addressing the challenges of the poorest people who live on the sidewalks of Mumbai. And that work took me to a situation where we got a lot of entitlements, a lot of subsidies. And what we realized that without actually planning it, what we thought worked very well for the poorest people living in city actually worked very well for the other people. And we realized that we had to go back to basics if we wanted to look at the same challenges in climate. But over 90% of all people who live informally in the global south, especially in Asia and Africa, design, construct, and finance their own homes. So all this discussion about fiscal transfers and all these things in development never came to them, and we don't think in climate they will come to them because they are illegal, invisible, and informal. So we've started a campaign called Roof Over Our Heads, in which over the last 2 years, we've designed a strategy in which we would work with the poorest neighborhoods, helping poor women and professionals to develop a way to identify design and physical materials and finance that people put into their homes, and then to look at how to tweak these things so that better materials are available, better construction systems are available, and gradually in the money that people already spend, they can produce more resilient options. So in the first year, which is last year, we developed the methodology of how young professionals would work with the poorest neighborhoods with a cohort of women to study their houses in a way that we could standardize a minimal documentation so that when we plan and we succeed in creating 100 such labs in about 20 countries, that all of us would do some specific things, but we would add on other elements that are very local but very critical. So last year we finished 17 informal settlements in 9 cities in India. And we have the book, the report on that. This year, we are planning to develop the capacities of other communities in other countries And the architecture of this process is that the team that produces the strategy in India builds the capacity of an anchor team in the other countries. So we will be doing, we call this training of the new trainers. So there'll be community leaders, there'll be professionals and NGOs who will form the core team like ours in India. In Asia, we are planning to do it in Philippines. In Africa, in East Africa, it'll be either Kenya or Uganda. And in MENA, we still have to fix up which country. And in Latin America, it'll be in Argentina. So the plan is to work this year to do stage 2 in India, which is to work with local artisans and communities to look at what they can do to improve the resilient quality of their homes together with whatever materials are available to them, and then to look at what new materials they can explore to improve that. So, in a way, we will move to the next phase in India while helping the other countries that are committed to our processes to look at the first stage that we did, whether there's a spine of things which are same, but lots of things will be different. And we hope that learning from what is different and what is same, the repertoire of possible options begins to expand. That's the plan. It's very ambitious, but it's based on our belief that you work with a very skeletal team and you share everything you know with anybody else who wants to do this. Because real scale comes out of this kind of exponential multiplier effect rather than having a kind of a control center that does everything. So, to give you a very interesting example, we have a lab which we're doing with uh, a community of waste pickers in Bangalore. But we are ambitious because the waste pickers network is a huge network. And we are going to involve them not only in a lab to upgrade their homes, but our research also shows that a lot of the materials that poor people use for their homes is purchased from waste pickers. So how can we involve them in the innovative material production and make it into an income generating activity for them while it becomes something that communities can use for their homes, which will make them better? For me, we are learning lots of insights into how things remain the same, change, how important relationships and trust is, and how to navigate this very difficult space with simplicity, lack of complications, and to focus on what we really want to do, which is that very poor women must be able to assess how resilient their homes are and do something about it. Well, one of the things that COVID did to all of us is it gave us all a period to really reflect on what our investments were doing. We realized that the health system had been completely destroyed. It was not able to support poor people. The curfews, the inability to go to work brought devastation to poor people's lives, and that they had no real resilience built into their lives to cope with all this, except their collectiveness and their ability to survive, which was their own. It wasn't provided by any development investment. The other thing which came out very clearly in a lot of discussions was that, I mean, just take it in the roof over our heads thing. By creating a top down strategy in which investments were only made for those households that had secure tenure, you reached only 3 to 5% of the people who needed alternatives. So clearly, all the investment made in research, in education, in investments of addressing poverty only reached 5% people. That's a humongous amount of money over the last 5 or 6 decades. We have been very greatly supported by both the Champions team and the GRP in making all the connections that we've made so far. But there's a two-way challenge that we face. We ourselves spent the last 4 to 5 decades demanding duty bearers, that is the government, to, to do things that the poorest people wanted. We have never gone to private sector to seek their support. So we are also learning to develop our articulation, our arguments, our representation to become good partners to whoever we work with. Because just as we want others to treat us as equals, we need to be able to provide them with what they can do for us and how that's good for them. Because altruism has a very finite bandwidth. For private sector, for people who are working internationally, they need to see a value in what they do for you. So how do we design that value? How do we develop that process in a way that works for us? Because we don't want to do what we accuse other people to do, is just extract from them, take it, and then say, now we don't need you. So a part of what we are all struggling and co-producing. And Arab is a very good example of how it took us such a long time to define what they could possibly do, apart from being our champions and our supporters and providing all this. So as we speak, young engineers from Arab are working with our team in one of the Indian labs to look at what they bring to the table. And the beauty of this process is that the outcome will be co-produced. It's not Arab coming and saying, these are the rules, this is what it is. It's the community, the artisans who build their houses, our team, and these engineers who will sit together and say, let's co-produce a solution. And that solution requires structural integrity, it requires to be economical, it has to be resilient. So that's the framing part. But if we can do it and we can develop a logic and a rational and a evidence that it's a good strategy, then we move ahead. Or we then go back to the drawing board and say, which is a better way to do it? So we're working as much with communities as we are working with our local, national, and international partners, because we're all learning to do something in a different way. I think we aren't doing enough to produce truly locally led solutions in all the different areas that are critical for climate change. Most of the others are being driven by science, by international research, and by big, big picture collaborators. The and I feel that if at some opportunity that we have, if we could look at the meta level knowledge that's coming out of the few very interesting locally driven processes and look at ways by which those elements can be brought in to link the top down with the bottom up, because there aren't enough. Everything is, everything that we champion to be locally led is actually being financed and promoted by global institutions. And we are not seriously and carefully and sensitively analyzing their local quotient, the intensely local, aggregatable quotient. Because for me, local, if it is not aggregated, is lost. If I do one brilliant thing in one small location, it's not going to produce, unless it's something amazing, which in most cases these things are very humble and simple. They're not spectacular. So one of the important ingredients of locally led is to produce an aggregatable quotient. That's why the 100 labs concept is important, because the voices will be everywhere. They won't just be in India, or they just won't be in Kenya or one place or the other. So I feel that having accidentally initiated this process, because it wasn't a structured, planned, it's an organically evolving process. What we realize is that it has immense potential at a meta level to produce ways by which the bottom up and the top down can reach somewhere in the middle. It's not easy for people who sit in the global north or in the intellectual but southern geographies who produce global strategy and assume that because their logic and their output and their technology is great, that people will just take them. That's not happened. So how do we initiate this from both ends is what I think is the most critical challenge for people like us who feel that we need both. We need global institutions to do overarching assessments and uh, things like that. We need resources, but more and more evidence is coming that the crisis created through destruction and disasters costs more to local economies than anybody can throw money at them. So there's also a shifting paradigm that, there's so many things that climate has to turn on its head. The logic of the past. We're not doing it at a pace that we need to do it. You just have to meet a bunch of very poor women, and their ability to just carry on and cope and manage and nurture. We can talk about doom and gloom sitting in our comfortable middle class homes. You have all these women who are facing, they've had to migrate, they come to cities where they don't know the language, They have to live in difficult conditions. They have to scavenge their way through their lives. They are thirsty to understand how to do things differently, how they can do better for their families. And I feel that that is a depleting resource as well. So, nurturing that, drawing inspiration from that, uh, you know, uh, is what I think uh, sort of blunts the sort of the doom and gloom situation, because everything is doom and gloom. What does that mean? What do? You stop doing everything? You can't. You have to do something. So try it out. And failure is not a end of the game situation. You see, that's the other problem. We live in a world where, because we look at all success and failure through monetization, it's like a business closes down, it's a failure. And it's that person's failure. And then that person is finished. But we realize that the other day, somebody in the software business says, we all wear badges of our failures until we find a success thing. And why you guys in development are killed if you fail the first time? What I'm seeing is that, uh, you know, the the right to research. And when I say right to research, it's not the kind of research that, say, a university professor does, but the right to investigate, to interrogate, to reflect, to analyze, to opine. That's called, for me, the right to research. Has to be universalized in today's day and age. You can't make poor communities and the general public only become consumers of some esoteric research that somebody legitimates. And for me, that is a very seminal and basic belief that we have to build in everybody the capacity to investigate, to explore, to understand, to demand an explanation. Because that, for me, really represents the democratization of knowledge. Not make all of us the consumer of somebody else's knowledge all the time. So for me, uh, that's my yardstick to, whenever I come to events, either in the development space or the climate space. It's like, whose life are we talking about? Do those communities have the right to do what we have been privileged to do? If they did this investigation, would they come to the same conclusion as we did? Is there power in us doing it jointly so we can combine the knowledge they have on survival and we have on what the rest of the world is doing to produce a jump start to new explorations? I mean, these are the things which somehow are not being discussed in both the climate and the development space. Only a few privileged people. And now, if you look at global institutions, they only want to give research grants to people who have a PhD in their organization. That's nonsense. So I think that at the heart of finding meta solutions, there have to be a general commitment to democratizing this right, to investigate, to check out, to find out, and to have an opinion based on that rather than on somebody else's rhetoric.